All right, we are recording. Welcome everybody to today's virtual brown bag. As usual, we go through an intro so that people know what we're up to here. Privacy concerns, we are being recorded, so make sure that whenever you're sharing thoughts or screens or anything, you're not sharing something that could cause you trouble or that could cause us to go back and have to edit the video afterwards. We don't have time for that. So just be mindful of that, but please, don't have that prevent you from actually, contributing to the conversation. The idea is to have folks actually talking through the call. What is this virtual brown bag thing? Well, it's a place where we get together, we share tips and tricks. It can be something as little as a little shortcut that you use a lot all day, and it saves you a lot of time, on a weekly basis, for example. Let other people know about it. Maybe tools, maybe articles that you've read that, started like some thoughts in your mind around something, maybe run those by other guys here and we can have a conversation about it, books, whatever experiences you've learned the hard way or frustrations, difficulties that you've been going through. Maybe you've overcome it. You can share how you did it, or you have not overcome it, and maybe other people have gone through the same thing and can help you out, put you in the right way. So make sure to have it not as a one-way conversation, but more of a let's all talk through the topics. Logistics, we do this every Thursday, 12 to 1 Central Time here on Skype, free for everybody. So let your friends and coworkers know about it. Here's a partial list of topics that we've covered over the years so that you can see we've been all over the place. There's not a specific agenda that we go through. Sometimes people will suggest topics and we end up, meeting on a given topic, but most of the time it's just whatever people feel like talking that day, that's what we go over. We have the virtualbrownbag.com website where you can always find the link to this meeting so that you know where to join in, as well as the links to the previous meetings, all the recordings we posted up, and it's all listed there right on the homepage, so make sure to check it out. And all right, other than that, I think we do have one topic at least to get us started, because George posted about the alt.net thingy, which I remember very fondly of it. I have some stories to talk about. But anyway, George, why has that come up?
Oh God, why is it? Oh, because I think someone asked me. Oh, I gotta look it up. So one of our students who's working in .NET asked what is a good like HTML templating library for like just doing emails in .NET. And it's one of those things where it's like, because he was like, well, he's like Razor, but like it's kind of difficult to get it set up, and it's really too much for what I need. For what I need, I need something simpler. And it's like, yep, I have been there before. The .NET open source community is really, really weird, and then we just kind of lost that spawned a discussion of like how the community has evolved, right? So
Right.
first, Microsoft, you had .NET that came around, that Microsoft pushing in open source was barely even a thing back then,
Right.
and everyone just went in and started using stuff from Microsoft because that's what you did. Um, and then like very very slowly, you kind of started people getting disenchanted with what Microsoft was offering, and kind of saying, you know what, like let's go look out and beyond that, look into open source, and maybe build some alternative patterns, because even just the patterns Microsoft is offering, we don't like. Much of that actually was centered in Houston and
Yeah.
in Houston, Austin, just in general, Texas.
Austin. Yeah.
Yeah. So like Jeremy Miller was a big leader of that, which is like kind of when I started cluing into all this stuff. And then what happened was like that whole movement was like that very like about as successful as it can be, in that those ideas went on to influence Microsoft hugely, with Scott Guthrie kind of ascending a bunch of those people got hired to work at Microsoft. But at the same time, it coincided with like, people just getting sick and tired and leaving .NET, and that hole didn't really get filled in any particular way. And now we're kind of back in the situation where, yeah, there's open source in .NET, but as far as I can tell, it's not a very active community, right?
Right.
It's just,
Yeah,
yeah.
Well,
Go ahead.
sorry, you dropped up just for a second.
All those like places for discussions where I like, yeah, where like a lot of my stuff was forged, like Code Better, Los Techies is still kind of around. All that, it's just kind of gone now.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. Is there anybody on the call who had participated on the alt.net events and get-togethers? I know that Alper used to be active there too, but I don't see him on the call here.
I'm here. So I just put my initials.
Oh, you are there? Oh, there you go.
Yeah. I mean, I participated a couple of code camps and stuff. I mean, the Austin.net user group was mostly run by people who were just behind the alt.net stuff anyways, and then the Austin code camps, and then here in Houston we mostly did the geek dinners and stuff. So.
The geek dinners, yes.
And you organized the geek soccer thing, so that was kind of cool.
Right.
The alt.net people took over like the user groups just period because like they just have so much more energy than anyone else, right? And interest. It was just like a very interesting lesson in how communities evolve, like crescendo, and then can falter again.
Yeah, I was glad. Excuse me. I was glad that you brought that up because I'm always doing like this self-reflection thing where I look back and I see like what were some like pivotal points in my career, like things that may have happened, maybe courses that I've taken or people that I've met or people that I've worked with that one way or another have made me like change directions in my career or just brought something to my attention that I'm like, where has that thing been all this time, kind of thing. And alt.net is one of them. I always think of on that blog post there that I have up on the screen, right, where Jeremy Miller talks about that one first .NET alt.net event that happened back in October 2007. Some 100 odd souls descended upon Austin. I was one of those because I don't remember how I heard of the conference at the time. Maybe it was a blog post somebody had up, and then I said, oh, that looks like interesting and very different. So yeah, let's stop right there. Around that time, there used to be several conferences that were .NET specific that I would either attend or speak at, right? And they were pretty much Microsoft centric. Everybody there were like Microsoft developers using Microsoft tools, and that's my experience up to that point. That's all I knew. I didn't know anything about anything, outside of Microsoft related things. And then I see maybe it was a blog post or something like that talking about the alt.net conference and how it's an open spaces conference. And I'm reading like the discussion around it. It felt like very different, very fresh. I said, well, let me go check it out. So I signed up for it. It was a weekend conference, Saturday, Sunday. I think we actually got there on Friday evening to get to know each other, do the networking, and sort of like understand how the conference was going to play out. And then I mean, as I get there, I start seeing like all of these, heavy caliber people, like Martin Fowler and a lot of people that are now very well known, like Jerry Miller himself, and then Scott Guthrie and some folks like that. I'm like, oh wow, drawing this kind of great minds to a conference, that's pretty unique. So that to me was interesting. And then the Oh, am I back now? Seemed like I dropped off.
Yep, you're back.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, as I mentioned, it was an open spaces event which I had never been to, right? So if you haven't seen or have been to an open spaces event, to me that was like very refreshing because again, I was used to going to conferences where you have multiple tracks, you have the same kind of there is a talk by a speaker who runs through his content, and then at the end or maybe throughout the presentation you ask questions, and that's about it. That was the format I was used to. And then I get there, they explain how open spaces are run, right? Where you don't have an agenda. The way it goes is, there is a facilitator who's going to explain the rules for the type of event. And then essentially there's going to be a time box activity where anybody there in the group can go up to a board and post an idea for a talk or a conversation, which could be either something that the person would like to present to the group, or it could be just a conversation that the person wants to pose to the group and then have an open discussion around it. And then each person who puts something up there on the board would then have like 30 seconds or a minute or however long I don't remember to pitch that idea to the group, explain why the person has put that up on the board. And then another time box activity for everybody there to cast their votes. And then, the ones that got the more votes, the facilitator would split those based on the number of rooms that we have available. For example, like 5 rooms, so we can have 5 concurrent tracks. And then, we would self-organize like that. Who's going to go in which room, what's the order and everything. And then people who would join in one of those talks, they would write down notes and whatever, and there would be one person, usually the person who proposed the topic, to just post in a common area where everybody would be able to see it, the summary of that talk. Okay, this is the topic, this is what came out of that conversation, like the bullet points. And that was pretty cool. And things that really struck with me, again, I was so used to going to a talk where it's like, okay, here's how you build a web forms application in ASP.NET, right? And telling you, okay, this is how you have to do it, type of thing. Tech stack. At that alt.NET conference, that what flipped me around was that it was not like that at all. People were not talking about specific tools or focusing heavily on specific tools. They were focusing on, this is the business problem that we are running into. This is how we address it. This is how we approached it. The tools that we may use, the patterns that we may use, but starting from the business problem that they are trying to address, and then picking pattern, tools, stacks, what to accomplish that. Whoa. It's one of the main things that I remember getting out of it. I remember like sitting in a room where, people are talking about behavior-driven development. And then again, this was 2007. That had been 3 or 4 years after I started like writing unit tests and getting my mind around the whole, okay, do you write the test first or last? Or I was still trying to figure those things out. And then people are talking about behavior-driven development, which to me was the first time I was hearing about that. And then you have in a room folks like Martin Fowler and those, big minds talking about those. And I was just like sitting there trying to absorb all of that. A lot of it was like flying way over my head. But I remember like taking lots of notes down and thinking, this is exactly the kind of stuff that some of that I was hearing, from people in podcasts or blog posts. And I was trying to do some of that on my own there, right? But then being involved with a community like that, where people were actually doing that actively, was very mind-opening. Having somebody like, there were a lot of people in the Java community, in the Ruby on Rails community, right? And in the .NET space, we had web forms. So Ruby on Rails was gaining traction. And then we have Scott Guthrie, and this is the story as we heard there, and as I remember, Scott Guthrie gets on a plane from Seattle to Austin, and he is like, oh, folks are talking about Ruby on Rails. Oh, let me see if I can put something like that together, an MVC framework on the .NET, the ASP.NET stack. And that's how ASP MVC was born, right? When he arrived in Austin, he essentially gave us a demo, like firsthand, to what become ASP.NET MVC as we know today. But that was pretty cool, like seeing that even though some folks were there to say, oh, I'm so fed up with all this Microsoft way of doing things, and then here you have like somebody like Scott Guthrie from Microsoft flying in and saying, oh, yeah, you guys are interested in that? Yeah, we can totally do that. Here, I just did that on the plane. What do you guys think? What kind of feedback do you have? Oh, yeah, let's work on it. I've seen a lot of other folks that later worked on the, what is it, managed extension framework, the math, for dependency injection, and other folks working closer together, like Microsoft folks working closer together with open source folks related to, say, the unit test frameworks and things like that. So I saw that approximation, which was very, it was changing for me. That was very cool. And then, of course, out of that, I actually wrote down the geek dinners because we had folks from Houston up there. And then when we came back to Houston, it's like, okay, that was pretty cool, getting together and talking about the actual problem and actual tools type of thing. That's where we started the geek dinners that Alper mentioned. We would get together maybe once a month and have that kind of discussion. And then somebody created the virtual alt.net at the time. And then they invited me to do like a series on Solid, for example. So I did a bunch of Solid presentations, one for each principle all the way back then. And the guy who was running that virtual group, Zach Young, later we've met at a in-person presentation that I gave. And then somehow the idea of having a brown bag meeting came up. And then somebody said, oh, man, can't we do that virtually so that more people can participate? And Zach said, well, we have these accounts, live meeting accounts that we run the virtual alt.net. We could use that for the virtual brown bag if you want. Like, yeah, let's do it. Whatever, anything that works for people. So it takes us back to where, the inception of the virtual brown bag that we are doing today. So again, I have a lot of good things that came out of it. I remember there were the bad things, like the why so mean thing that came out of that, because some folks that were already that had stepped away from Microsoft, they were so adamant talking about Microsoft that they ended up being seen as like mean folks. Like, if you're not doing the way I'm doing kind of thing, you're doing it wrong. And so there were some like not so great things that came out.
Yeah, go ahead. Turned out to just be normal now. Like, I do not think anyone was being meaner back then than what is just normal now.
Yeah, I know that's it's like, as I was there and I saw things playing out, I felt like, okay, I would not be directing people that way, but at the same token, it's like, nah, whatever. I am taking the value out of this, and so I'm good. But yeah, sorry for the long story. It's just that it brings me back a lot of like good things that I got out of that.
I will say, yeah, like for me, alt.net was my first introduction to like really actually thinking like an engineer. Because like I'd done the academic stuff before, and then there was a lot of like just putting stuff together. But the whole like take a step back and think about the real like core problem that the business is going through. That really to me came entirely from like my exposure to like the various people around alt.net. Like I mentioned it before, Carl Seguin's Foundation of Programming book was like way more influential to me than like Clean Code or anything like that.
Right.
I guess still haven't read all of Clean Code. But yeah, and like when y'all started doing those virtual brown bag meetings, like that was actually how because that moved online, like that's how I got involved, because like I was just by myself as a developer at a large corporation, like just very hungry for interaction with other devs. And I don't remember how probably Twitter or something that ended up popping up.
Right.
Or maybe and I joined, and that's like how we ended up like doing stuff on there. So yeah, it's been a winding path. I do think it's interesting that like the whole how that reflects on how technical communities evolve.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, like, this is a little different because, part of the reason, like, it was really just so successful. Like, guys from that movement who got hired by Microsoft. I mean, Scott Gu got promoted many, many levels up.
Yeah.
And then Miguel Icaza went to work there. Glenn Block went to work there. Phil Hack went to work there. There's definitely
Scott Hanselman.
Yeah. Oh, Hanselman was already there, right?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think that was prior to it.
I guess he was.
He was there. Yeah, he was the one that wrote on the car, why so mean? There is a photo. If we look for that, there is a photo of that somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was just prior to him joining Microsoft.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like really some of the biggest names at Microsoft now really had their foundation then. So yeah, right there in the second link, I guess, huh?
Right. Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, I noticed that. Alper had just posted that as well. So here you go. Excuse me.
But yeah, I mean that was interesting, and like, but then again,
Yeah,
like,
there you go.
Like, I actually can't put quite a finger on this. Like, does something like that currently exist in .NET at all? Like a community like that, and it's just not near me, not in my circle, so I'm not seeing it, or does it not exist? Like it just kind of went away, and I really can't put my finger on that. And honestly, even outside of .NET.
Yeah, honestly, not that I'm aware of, because so that was 2007. Later, then in I guess late 20 or mid 2011, that's when I jumped to Ruby on Rails and kind of like stepped away from .NET for a number of years. So I did get to attend a couple of Ruby conferences, which was interesting. It was again another experience because it was very conferences I had attended at the time. And then after that, I was like going back and forth to Brazil. So I kind of like stepped away from community related things like that. And then after I came back, I'd say I've been mostly involved with specific user groups and a couple of conferences. And some of these conferences, like for example, Houston Tech Fest, right, where it started as a .NET conference because it came from the guys running the .NET group in Houston. Eventually, they started growing the conference to include like a track for Java, a track for just Agile in general, and the track for JavaScript and things like that. So that's my experience with that. I do miss like open spaces type of conferences though. That's something that's at the back of my mind as something that I would like to do. I was planning on having something like that happen this year, but then of course pandemic happened, so it changed a bunch of my plans. But maybe for next year, that's really something that I miss. Because again, after we had that all.NET conference in Austin, we also did one facilitator in the same format, and people really enjoyed. And after that, whenever we had like code camps and things like that, we would have at least one or two tracks that were open spaces, really to allow people to engage and propose these conversations around like real world chat conversation. So I've been personally missing that.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. Yeah, I don't know. But like honestly, so for me, I actually have to get another angle on it because it's really not even. So I had another community which kind of had a similar ish arc, because I was off on the edges of y'all in New Orleans, so I was kind of sort of involved, like me and Zach and a bunch of like regional leaders were always on like the Microsoft calls when they were trying to coordinate the user groups when Zane was doing it.
Right.
But like, so New Orleans kind of had its own tech renaissance at the time. And there was a very similar kind of thing that happened where there were a bunch of really good people around that were just independently put a bunch of time toward setting up stuff that they wanted for themselves. So the yearly centerpiece of it was our Barcamp conference, which was, it wasn't an open spaces conferences, but it was an unconference. So the planning for it was entirely like getting space, getting lunch, getting insurance, getting shirts, doing the marketing, and no talk planning whatsoever. And then everyone showed up. There's a big board. Everyone just wrote down what they wanted to talk about, put it on the board, and the conference just organized itself right then and there. And then there was always a second day like project, which was always the hardest thing to come up with. And I mean, like, we ran that for like 10 years, right? It was, and just, this, it was really, really successful at first, like really kind of built up the community. There was at one point, like, I counted like 15 different tech user groups down here, which, for at the time population like 300,000 less maybe because of Katrina. And it was really interesting. Like, there was a lot, like, I sat in the room multiple times with like people coming in and be like, you know what, this feels a lot like Silicon Valley, it felt like. And then what happened was just like that engine couldn't sustain itself. Like, so people started getting jobs which required them to move away, or having babies, or like the last bar camp, basically, like, I had to I couldn't do it. I had to tap out of it because, my wife was pregnant, was having a baby like that week. And I was like, I'm sorry, I can't plan this at all. I can't, I will show up if I can, but I can't be involved. And then just like, there was not enough new energy there that was dedicated to that same vision to fill in that gap. And so I feel like that's like a very similar trajectory where, you have communities that get based around like a group of people. But, and I don't know, like, I guess the lesson is that like people need to start thinking early and like invest into figuring out how to get new blood into that community and keep it there, right? If you want that sort of thing to stick around, right? Because like with New Orleans, I wouldn't say it was successful because there wasn't like a goal like with Alt.net to get Microsoft to change its like patterns, but everyone involved did pretty well because organizing and learning and making connections as a result of it. And yet like you still kind of somehow had it fall off. So I don't know. I guess it's just kind of random musings on building a sustainable community.
Right.
I don't really quite know. All right. Anyone else have stuff they want to talk about? That was a good 30 minutes of wankery.
Yeah. Good stuff.
What's everyone working on? Anything cool? Or want to talk about? We could talk about this some more too.
Yeah. Ask questions.
Yeah.
Raise concerns.
Yeah. I've been trying to get more junior people to show up, which is kind of its own very surprising like difficulty, like because like for all the like junior people are lost all the time that they see, it is sometimes most of the time pulling teeth to get questions and conversations started there. And I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I guess that's part of what imposter syndrome is, but it's so weird. It's like, it's something I don't really understand. I never felt it on that level Like honestly, like remember like in virtual.net days, I would just join and be like, here's the crazy idea I'm thinking of, and you'd be like, that's dumb.
Yeah.
But
Well, it's
yeah.
yeah. Alper, we're to the thing you just posted. Let me just follow up the thing that George mentioned, because I remember at the Houston Alt.net conference we had, I think it was in 2008 maybe. I remember at the time I was experimenting with MVVM pattern in WPF apps and trying to get my mind around it and how to connect the parts. So I had some ideas around it. And then I proposed one topic at the conference to say, hey, I'm playing around with this thing. I would like to present this to the group and get feedback, right? Mm-hmm. Which is a departure from like, I know a lot of people way before they do any kind of like presentation, they're like, oh no, until I know exactly what I'm talking about, I'm not going to do it. I'm like actually the opposite. It's like, hey, look, let me know where I'm getting this wrong here. And, breaking that little shell of like feeling comfortable with showing something that's like, depending on the people seeing it, yeah, you may get some like mean looks like, oh, dude, you're so stupid, you're so dumb. But I felt like, from my experiences, if you present yourself as the person like, yeah, I have my stuff all down here, let me show you. Yeah, people receiving that message, they see the Holy Grail. Now, if before you present the thing, you say, hey, look, let me set the context. I just got started messing with this. These are the things that I've run into. This is how I got here. Please help me take my next step forward. That's it, man. I've never had a situation where people would look up to me and say, oh, dude, that's just so dumb. Why are you doing that? No, they're like, no, I see where you're going, but if you continue going down that path, you're going to run into the following traps. Oh, excellent. Let's have an intelligent conversation around it. So just something I wanted to add there.
Yeah.
All right. So, yeah, Alper says, considering architectural katas. That is interesting. I've never done anything like that. Tell me about it.
I don't have an O'Reilly account, so I'm not.
Oh, yeah, me neither.
Yeah, what is that, Alper?
I'll send you a public link. That's why I couldn't find it. So I mean, this is just like people like Neil Ford and some other ThoughtWorks people. They've been doing architectural katas around the conferences for a while now, for over the years. So it's just basically taking a business problem and then just creating an architecture for it, right? So the deliverables are just a couple of architectural diagrams, topology diagrams and stuff, and then maybe some, sequence workflow diagrams, identifying the different components that would just go into that application and how they would interact with each other. So as part of this whole COVID thing, they went around and looked for some actual businesses who are in need of expertise for developing their applications. So they found this startup, and then they're just basically doing a competition, kind of like you form teams. There's a startup, they did pitch, and then they talked about their application and what they want to do, and then teams just come up with architectural ideas for that use case. And and then there are some judges, and they'll be just like semi-finalists and stuff, and then you just get bragging rights basically. So I thought it was kind of interesting because right now I find myself in a position where I have the the principles and other things, and they're also reinforced by that Uridon course that I just studied recently. Then marrying that with some modern architectural tools, be it AWS or Lambdas and what have you. So and for me, with the advent of AWS and cloud and all that stuff, so you have the whole thing in your all the computing, storage, all the resources are at your fingertips right now, right? So it's more like so it would be nice to be able to apply the architectural principles to like a real business problem where there's like a nicely defined context and see how that works. So yeah, I was just thinking about doing that. So it's, I mean,
So,
not just
what are
stopping
some examples?
at architectural diagrams, but maybe actually going forward and just like develop an application for that. Maybe just the API part, or however much time that I can just devote to it, I guess.
Can you click random kata? I'm just curious what they look like.
Where are you seeing that? Oh, right here.
Bound or lead.
Mm-hmm.
I'll try. All right. Interesting. So, have you? So, first of all, I bristle at the misuse of the word kata, but okay. Because again, kata, the point of katas is that you have a series of steps that you repeat in it over and over again in order to obtain perfection, like in minutia and drill,
Right.
which is this is not. It's great. It's exercises, but that's not what it is. Have you done any of these, Alpar?
I have not. I've done more specific katas like object calisthenics or something that you know, just designing classes or something with that, like not using ifs and you know, not mutating data and that kind of stuff, but not at this level before. And I think it's kind of interesting. I mean, they use the word kata for this one. I guess if you look at it from the actual startup who's soliciting architectures, like they're just going to look at all these architectures and then see which one will just fit well vision of the application going forward.
So, and I like this. I 100% be behind that idea that you need to practice this more than the handful of times in your career you actually get to do it. That writing software book I read like talks about that actually. I think in chapter 2 about how you need to do that. I will say so this problem statement, the way it's posed, it reminds me a lot of an exercise that we have in our boot camp on architecture, on systems architecture, which I'm actually trying to think of a way to change. Because here's kind of what happens, and granted, it's different when you're doing it with really beginner people versus more advanced people. We're kind of training for architecture, but you know, we kind of explain like, okay, here's your toolbox. You've got clients, you've got servers, you've got services, databases, workers or agents, caches, queues. Like these are all the different types of things that you have. It's systems design, really, right? And then you kind of give a problem statement like this, or like the way we say, like, okay, design YouTube, right? And people are supposed to go do it. And the thing that ends up happening is 90% of the solutions all look very, very similar, right? It's because at that level of problem statement, it's super generic. Like, right? There's always a client, there's always a web server which talks to a database, there's always a search agent that's like going and aggregating stuff for search and an indexing database, maybe an analytics agent, and then maybe you have a couple of like services like for doing email and stuff like that. And you know, like depending on what sort of load you expect in different places, you're just basically dropping queues in front of areas. And like when you go do that and you generate the diagrams, like, and I've seen this happen multiple times, like, and like this was even the very first criticism I said when I was like looking at the examples in our like guide. I was like, this will always pretty much generate exactly the same diagram with just differences on where you put. So, and that's not really what happens with architecting system. It's good to learn about those pieces, but it's just not that simple. So I wonder if they see the same type of thing happen when people do these.
I mean, they did a little bit of orientation thing, and then they just talked about the usual stuff, right? I mean, they call it the entity trap, right? Which is something that's kind of Rudy mentioned too, like oh, there's a customer, let me create a customer table, or there's a product, let me create a product table, and just put some
Mm-hmm.
joins and everything, put the CRUD application together. So they're just basically warning people against that kind of practice, and you know,
Mm-hmm.
look to see uh, what the real requirements of the application is, and also the ambiguity that this comes with it, right? I mean, this was actually a pitch by an actual startup. The person who was just talking about it was just saying that to some of the questions, he was just basically answering, well, we've never thought about that before. So it's something that, being comfortable with the, ambiguity, and then just trying to keep the priorities in the front of your mind to deliver what's
Now,
needed and nothing more.
I would almost say, okay, and now I'm like coming up with ideas for like how to redo our exercises. Like, what if the focus shifts? Like, yeah, you can still produce a diagram, but you shift the focus from producing that diagram to having like one person, they're gonna play as a product owner, and then the focus is more the process, like formulating questions you have to ask them, and them trying to give you answers for that, and sometimes making it up in as best a way as they can, or leaving stuff unknown or stuff like that. Because it's almost like I feel I feel like that is a very important part of architecture, right? Like being able to ask those questions. Um, and I wonder if that would kind of, and I think that that can be drilled and actually generate some interesting stuff. And there is an aspect of that that is drilling, because a lot of times you do actually want very similar questions and stuff that you just need to drill it into people's heads so that they don't forget to ask those questions, right? Ah, I might need to try that. I don't
Interesting.
know. What do y'all?
I dig it. I like back, I think, to the homepage where good old friend Ted Neward mentioned, so how are we supposed to get great architects if they only get the chance to architect fewer than half dozen times in their career? And that's true. Like, how often are people at that level? Not a whole lot, right? I mean, like, I don't see that many, like, okay, this guy's only a software architect. That's the only thing that he does, so that he keeps jumping from project to project. What I've seen, at least personally, it's mostly like, okay, there's this one guy who's going to be the architect, is going to get, through this project, beginning to ends or up to a certain point. And so that may, take a couple of years, and then they move on to another thing. So how do people like that get to practice these things, right? Okay, how do I architect something today, given the context of users nowadays, the technology as it is nowadays? These are like random thoughts that are coming to mind as I think about this.
Yeah, but again, like I just caution, if the end result, like you're supposed to like generate a diagram in like an hour or so, they all end up looking very similar. Given that that those sort of questions are that way, like it's just what I've seen happen. Which I mean, maybe it is the case. Maybe that's the reason AWS exists and has those particular components are because and so many companies find it useful is because those particular components are very useful to companies, and the central part of your application really will be the same way of composing them. It just
Yes.
feels like it kind of strips some creativity, will make you blind to certain types of things. But maybe I don't know. Albert posted another link that does work.
Oh, okay. Get it. Thank you.
I
Hold
just like
up.
the fact that it's actually a real business case, like because I'm looking at all the I'm really, of course, tired of Northwind examples and stuff, but there are other examples, even AWS, they're called like pony ride stuff, and so it's nice to be able to work on some kind of a real business case.
Interesting. I wonder, like so far, and I don't know if it's the purpose of these events here, but so far we've focused a lot on the tech stack part of architecture. At what point should we also consider UX as part of the architecture?
Right away.
Well, yeah. Well, as far as the exercise, it's answer questions on UX.
So I heard like two of you guys overlapping.
What would you say?
I also heard maybe Tony. There was a second voice, and I couldn't make words from both.
Okay. I was saying UX is an implementation detail.
What?
Them's fighting words.
Cue me on the spot right now.
I hard disagree.
Oh man.
I mean, I will say, like, you can't really do UX without someone there to ask questions about UX too, right? Because you don't know whether which. Assuming you have two ways of doing this, a similar kind of workflow, you need something to base it off of. You can distill that the workflow is necessary, but picking between the workflow, that's just gonna. I mean, I guess you could train your instinct around how stuff feels, but you still kind of need someone there to answer those questions, right? How else would you do it?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's like, okay, we're talking, oh yeah, there's AWS, there's Lambdas, there's this, there's that, but it's like, okay, let's take that step back. Why would we need any of that, right? From the user's perspective, thinking, UX from the standpoint of, what's important to the user? What is the context of the user? Does it matter for the user if he's going to click on a button and wait, 2 seconds or 30 seconds? Well, it really depends. Maybe if it's something that they're going to do once a month, it doesn't matter if it takes 5 minutes to run a report. So just getting this overall, where are we going with this, to then decide what's the better architecture to support that deliverable.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of funny you said that, because even during the orientation, when this startup person was just talking about the company and then what the product they need, there were already people asking about have you thought about AWS? Have you talk about Azure? Which one do you prefer? And the guy's like, it doesn't matter. It's just cloud, right? It's not a. So to me, the entire thing just falls from. I mean, it just follows the UX. What is the person or the business actually trying to do? In the end, they want to make money, reduce costs, or just make the world a better place, whatever it may be. And sometimes the user experience may just lead you to a solution where no technology is necessary. You can just do it with Excel,
Right.
I mean,
I don't know if that's fair. Yeah, I get it, but again, if you're being serious about this and you're being realistic, you have to take that additional step back and right, it's not just kind of what your point, what your goal is as a company, but you're taking into account future things for the company, which includes ability to have your people work on something, or ability to hire people, really going to those business decisions. And a point it very much matters whether you pick Azure or AWS or GCP or whatever. So I don't know.
To me, it depends on the person who's paying the bills, right? I mean, if their priority is just to get the product outdoor, maybe they're not really worried about having to hire people later on. I mean, if that's their stated objective, sure. If not, I wouldn't just take the liberty to just make architectural decisions based on what they would need in the future. That's basically the most simple application of Yagni there.
But I don't know that that's, again, like that's kind of just like, so look, you could say, look, we're ignoring those questions for the purposes of the exercise, of course, or because like we don't have that information. But like if you're being serious about like training yourself out what sorts of questions need to get asked, then I think that it's not realistic that those questions aren't going to come up pretty much right away when you have those conversations. You know, like pick Node for the project that I'm currently working on. It's not because that's the best thing for the client or that's the thing I want to work on. It's because with the team I have, part of the goal being to help these junior developers gain experience and not while this being a short project, I can't have them just learning a whole new language for the entire time, right? I need to deliver something for the client. I need to have them learn it. Like I have to treat, like the client's not the only stakeholder. They're the stakeholder. We're the stakeholder. And when you kind of evaluate all that as a unit, like you always do have to make those decisions, and they do matter. It's just like, yeah, you don't necessarily have to think about it at, you know, like you do have to make a decision of it following a similar process, is what I'm saying. You don't have to think about it at all times. That doesn't necessarily have to be the first question, but realistically, you're usually pretty concerned, right?
I want to go back to Claudio's question about at what point do we consider UX as part of the architecture, and I just want to be the person that says really ridiculously early. I think that we've been kind of dancing around the point that the UI and the UX is the point of contact for your customers, the people who are paying you as an organization to survive and to continue to be an organization and to hire people. They don't technically care if it's a bunch of HTML and CSS and some lightweight JavaScript made in TextMate or whatever. Like that, it's completely immaterial to them. They just care, how does it function? Does it do what I need it to do? And the rest of the stuff is usually more aimed at cost-cutting exercises for the organization. Can I hire less experienced people because I chose Node? Can I get more done by offloading content management to a separate group of non-engineers because I chose to use a database with an administrative panel? But the users, none of that. It's all immaterial to the users.
So how are you defining UX in that conversation?
Yeah, that's a good point, because another thing I wanted to segue into is that like uptime, reliability, the fact that it functions at all, consistency, those are all part of the UX as well. And those are some of the things that like servers and language choices do bring you. You know, database choice is the same concept. But ultimately what I mean by UX, not to sidestep the question, is just the user's literal experience of using the product. Does it fulfill their needs in a manner that will keep them coming back?
And that's a thing where, like, I'm so on board with having user groups and like people who can, you know, really talk about it early and having those conversations. I've never once been in a situation where that was feasible to do. Well, that's not true. I one time early in my career when I was at a large company, like I actually got to go on site and talk to some of the staff who would be using it, but like never since, because it was always like, yeah, it's just like it's always something I would like, but it's never happens. Because
are you saying that's because there's like too many barriers between you as an engineer or an architect and the consumers of the product that you're building and architecting?
Well, okay, so let's talk about it this way. I'm just trying to think of like specific projects that I had. So like a lot of the times you know, I'm sure I've built something for the public market, but usually it's for a business market, right? So they're building a product that will be sold to other companies, right? and it's the person who's commissioning it for, who's paying for it, they have a vision of what they want, and we're going off of that vision. Now, they're not getting together user groups to study that vision because they have a pretty clear idea of what they want. They think that's when asking question and pointed question comes in, becomes important. But they have this clear vision of what they want, and they want that thing, and they think that everyone else is doing it wrong. And with this product, the reason it will be successful is because it will really distinguish them and show everyone the right way forward. So where would that user group come in, right? So you usually totally have access to the person who's the product owner and has the vision, but we're talking beyond that, right? Like we're talking about like, all right, like really talk to the end users, talk to the people in various roles and who would be in those various roles. And that I've never actually seen, both from like a time investment sort of thing, right? Because you've got timelines, and it's easy to blow a ton of budget on it. But also from like, even when I've asked for stuff like that before, clients like we don't have that. Like we don't have those people right now. These are all fictitious people that we will have at some point, right? I think that there's, that's something, that's the sort of thing that like when you're Facebook adding a feature, or you're some large company with like good chunks of VC funding, you can do that. But the bulk of us, we don't get that, right? You just have to kind of imagine it and ask pointed questions. Does that mean, I don't know. I mean, is that other people's experience too?
That has been my experience, as you said, with bigger clients. I've had situation where, yes, they do have UX designers working with, a selected group of potential users, and then they build, interactive mock-ups that they can put in front of the users and have the users use it, and then test it to see, okay, are the users getting what we are doing with the UX UI here? Are they understanding, or are they like feeling stupid in front of the app because they don't know what to do there? So they run like A/B tests, all based on like interactive mockups and things. So by the time it actually gets turned into user stories and put in front of developers, they've already done all of that study. So it's like the likelihood of a solution actually to be successful with the user is much higher because they've done all of this previous work. But then again, that's working in a big client that does put the resource and the budget into making something like that happen. And
I will say, like, that's also still a much smaller scale than the type of stuff both of you initially said, right? Because that's like a matter of like, well, should this workflow be behind a menu, or should it launch with a button, and how do you get access additional stuff to it? That's not the scale of like, that's not the scale of doing analysis on whether this workflow has to be asynchronous or not asynchronous, or whether you can launch it and later be notified of success and failure versus right now. Like that sort of stuff, like I've just never even heard of anyone doing real analysis on, as opposed to just like someone asks a question, then someone goes, and makes a decision. Right? So I mean, like, I think it's good to talk about like, well, this is the stuff it should be, but it's also important to keep in mind that a lot of it requires resources that nobody freaking has.
That's us. That's what we do.
Yeah, I mean, agreed. I mean, you don't have the resources, but sometimes, like, even in this startup situation where, I mean, it's not, so if someone comes to you with a UX and a vision and stuff, they don't even know what their customers need, right? Startups. So you're not there to just validate their vision to see if it's going to be a market hit. You're there to just deliver the technical solution that reflects their vision. It may be right, it may be wrong, it may be the worst thing, it may be Twitter for dogs or something, but technically, if they have a vision, you talk to them, you try to understand their vision and UX, you just come up with a technical solution. It may be the worst idea in the world, but still, the startup, they have some money, they paid for you to create a technical solution, and you do it. So that's how I see it.
All right.
Yeah. I'm not like trying to like shut it down. I'm just like, it's important to keep in mind when most people are actually doing and have facility to do when we talk about how the way it should be. Because, you know, while yes, we can all agree it should be this way, we should also all plan for what you can do when it's this way, right?
I think that's a really important point to sort of normalize, like, yeah, aspirational state versus real state, and try and find some middle ground. I like that approach.
Yeah.
Very
I
cool.
gotta jump off for a stats meeting.
Yep.
Yep. Bye,
Time to
everybody.
wrap up. Thanks, everybody. Great.
Thank you.
Hope to
Bye.
see you all back next week. See ya.